Hey guys, it's Raven, and I'm recording this for you guys since I will not be able to be here in person, and my house is a mess. This is why you have this background. So tomorrow, tomorrow for me, so it'll be today for you guys, we're talking about tools. And so unfortunately, I have somebody coming in from out of town, so I'm not going to be able to be doing this live. This is why I'm recording this for you guys. So if you have any questions, make sure you post them in the study group. You can also post questions in reply to each one of the assignments, however it is that you want to do it. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Oh, no, not stop recording. Share screen. There we go. And I'm going to start there we go. Hopefully you guys can see that. So we are going to be working on tools. My glasses on because I'm blind as a bat. If you guys don't mind, it's morning for me, so I'm still having my part of my breakfast. So talking about tools. So which tools are you currently using in your altar? Which tools are you familiar with? What preconceived ideas you have about tools? So we're going to kind of challenge all of that in this class that we talk about today. So we're going to cover the basic tools and ones that you are absolutely that you must have on your altar, and some that are kind of must-haves. You know, most of us love the tools part of witchcraft because this is where all the toys are, all the pretty things, all of that. But in actuality, these tools also serve a purpose, and they're there to support your work. And then so if you are just looking at it just to amass a lot of it, which is kind of what I do, make sure that you understand that not everything that you buy that's witchy related is going to end up translating into a tool that you're actually going to use in your practice. Excuse me. Just make sure and understand through that process. And the other thing that's important to understand is when you take something and you designate it a tool, you've taken this item and you've elevated it from being something mundane to now being something that is a little bit less mundane and that is more what do you want to call it? Sacred. It's part of your ceremony. It's part of your altar. You cannot take that item and put it back for mundane use, right? So let's say you're going to take a wine glass and you're going to use it as your chalice at your next ceremony. You use that wine glass, you elevate that, you consecrate that wine glass, you elevate it to the place of chalice on your altar. When you're done, you can't just pick up that wine glass and say, okay, I'm just going to run it through the dishwasher and I'm going to stick it back in the cupboard. You can't do that. Why? Because now that piece has been elevated. That piece is no longer just a wine glass. That piece now is your chalice, and it needs to be held to a sacred standard. It needs to be protected. It needs to be considered precious and important. It's part of your magical practice. It's an extension of you. So keep that in mind. Every single tool that's going to sit on your altar is always going to be an extension of you moving forward into that. So you want to make sure that you take very good care of it and you never take it and then kind of, demote it to mundane things. I saw a lady one time that just made me cringe almost, that took a libation dish and decided to use it as an ashtray. Oh, I think every single fiber in my body was sticking straight up and going, no, don't do that. This is because you shouldn't be doing that. Once you have something that's designated sacred, you don't demote it back to mundane unless you cleanse the crap out of it. You now, disconnect from that tool. There's a ceremony to take something and disconnect it from you. That you can, if you perform that ceremony, then great. Now your tool is no longer been elevated to that place of sacred. But until you do that, it is a sacred tool and you should not be using it for something mundane. I hope that makes sense. So let's talk about, do you need tools? Not really. You can practice magic without a single tool. And people look at me and go, how the hell would I do that? You go to your astral space, like you have your little astral temple. If you've taken the meditation class, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you didn't, you need to go take that class because it's going to explain what that is. And when you are in your astral space, you can basically cast any spell you want to without any tools. You can, or if you want to use tools, you can have that tool basically come to you in that space. That is your magical space, your astral space, and you can create anything you need to in that space in order to cast your spell. So when I was younger, and when I was just starting, I had a portable altar that I took with me everywhere I went, just in case I needed to do something like a spell for somebody, mainly animals or anything like that. So what I do now is if I need to do that, I just take 15 minutes, I go into my sacred space, I bring up my sacred altar there, and I light my candle there, and I do whatever it is that I need to do for that person that I'm trying to do the work for. So I don't have to physically do the work. I can do it in my astral space. But a lot of times what happens is you want to be doing the work in this space first, physically, because once you start doing that, you understand, what does this work feel like once it's been done, once it's been completed, once it's been released? What is the alchemy that I'm looking to achieve with my spell casting? What does that feel like? What does that look like? So that once you achieve that alchemical point, now you can say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. So now when you're in your astral space and you repeat the same ceremony, you can tell, ooh, this didn't go well because I'm not feeling that alchemy. So we always want to start with physical tools. And then once you have enough practice in that and you understand what's going on and you understand how you feel, then you can move into your astral space for doing your work. So technically tools are not needed, but we all love the tools. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're all in here. It's one of the reasons why I survived, because this is what my business is, right? So tools are important to some extent, and the physical tool can be an extreme help in empowering your magic, in helping to channel your energy, because that's really all the magic is coming from your willpower. It comes from within you and the energies that you're manipulating. The tools just allow you to do that a little bit better. So imagine if you're making a salad, right? Having the knife is important. Can you still eat a tomato without a knife? Yes, but it's not going to look all pretty in the outcome. You could rip the tomato apart, but without, it would still be in pieces and you can throw it in the salad at that point. But in order for it to look nice and be the way that you want it to be, your knife is your best option. So you're going to slice that tomato, and you've taken that tomato, which is a plain old ingredient, you sliced it pretty and small and however it is you want it, and now you add it to the salad. It changes the alchemy of that salad, right? It's going to be different than if you just throw a whole tomato in there and then you eat the tomato by itself and then eat the rest of it. You don't quite get the same feeling from that as if you were to slice the tomato, put it in there, and eat the whole salad. So basically, when you use your tools, you want to know, what does that salad taste like? What does it feel like to eat that whole salad? So when you're in your astral space and you make a salad and you start astrally basically eating it and using it, you're going, oh, this feels right. This is what a salad is supposed to taste like. Or you go, oh, absolutely not. I don't know what the hell this is, but this is not a salad. So then you know what exactly it is that you're doing. So the tools are always an extension of you. You are powering the tools. The effort is being, if you put the knife next to the tomato, it's not going to cut the tomato. So if you have to pick up that knife to cut it. So the power still comes from you. You are empowering that tool, and that tool is now a magical extension of you when you're using it. So this is why your tools are very connected to you. Do not let other people touch it. Do not let other people take it. People can do serious work on you by using one of your tools. So your tools are not something that should just be left lying around all the time. It is a piece of you. It's part of you. It's almost kind of like a piece of your DNA. So it's something that should be cared for, protected, and all of that. So what is the one tool that you need to expand your practice? And a lot of people, when I do this, a lot of people will say candles. A lot of people will say incense. A lot of people will say oils. The tool is your will. That is the primary tool of your magical path. As witches, this is what spellcasting is about. I want this to change. I want to take this and translate it into this. I want to make this change happen. How am I going to do that? I am going to will it to happen. So I'm going to send my vibration out there to interact with the vibration of the thing. And then through my will, that vibration will be changed into whatever it is that I need it to be changed to. And then I can use it the way that I need to use it, right? So your will is the main tool that you need. So this is why we work with visualization. We work at honing our, intent, getting really close to that. We work on connecting with our higher self. All of those tools, all of those trainings that you do on a daily basis are honing your most powerful tool, which is your willpower. So tools inherently by themselves are never going to have as much power as your willpower does. So now you take a tool that's got an energy imbued with something already, and you add your willpower to it. Your willpower is what allows the energy in that tool to be released, right? So a perfect example that I'm going to show you guys. So Curio is Curio Craft and Conjure in Charlotte. They just announced that they're selling pieces of wood that have had been hit by lightning, which when I saw that, I was like, oh my God. So what happens? That piece of wood is going to have the lightning energy trapped within it. So I can take that piece of wood and I can stick it on my altar and go, do your thing. That energy is still trapped inside that piece of wood. Until I pick up that energy, I combine it with my will and decide how I'm going to apply that energy is still sitting on my altar inside that piece of wood doing absolutely nothing. So the tool is that no matter how powerful the tool is, you need to be able to have a trained will to unlock those tools. And I think I want to address, something that Erica actually said in one of her posts from last time's lesson. So Erica, talking to you. But I'm actually using it because she brought up a phenomenal example, and I want to use it, which is a lot of these traditions out there have these oath-bound ceremonies and rituals and all of that. And I to me, sometimes that's a little comical, because what should be oath-bound is not the ceremony itself, because the ceremony is a tool, right? What should be oath-bound is the training that brings you to where you can perform that ceremony, is the alchemy of that ceremony, is the outcome of that ceremony that you shared with the rest of the people that you're in ceremony with, right? So those are the things that are important and should be oath-bound and should be protected. The book itself is a book of spells and rituals. Anybody can pick that up. Without the proper training, without the honing of your will, and without the alchemy and the experiences that you have, that book is useless. You can take that book, open it up, perform the ritual without the proper training. Your results are going to be nil. You're going to be sitting there going, okay, I just burned some stuff. Woohoo! That's pretty much going to be the outcome of what you're doing. So it's really important to understand that when you start looking at your tools, when you start looking at ceremonies, when you start looking at all of these things that are part of your practice, the core of that practice is going to be you and your willpower and the training that you do for yourself every single day. Those tools are there to help you unlock that. But without that being present, the tools are nothing more than just tools. Right? If you have a knife sitting in your kitchen block at home, until you pick that knife up and start using, it's not really doing anything. It's sitting in your kitchen block, right? So it's important to understand that. Think about why you are choosing each item. So this is also important. I used to, when I first started, for me, it was like my altar was the everything but the kitchen sink altar. Everything pretty that I bought, I would go straight on my altar, and not all of those things needed to be there, right? So when you choose an item for your altar, sit with it for a few days, pick it up, sit with it, connect with that item, and say, where do you belong? And here's what's important. Remember, we are shamanic witches, so animism is going to kick in. Ask the item, would you work with me in this? And then you're going to get a reply. And the class that I taught, it was 2 classes before this one, was actually pretty funny, because my student said, I've been collecting tools for my altar for years. I've never asked a tool. I mean, I have an altar bell. I've never asked it if it wanted to be there. So she said, after this class, I went back and I sat down with every single tool and I started asking it. She says, and I got a big no for my bell. My bell said, no, I absolutely do not want to be sitting on your altar doing the work. And she's like, so all these years, I've been basically forcing this tool to work when it wasn't meant to be in that space. So it's important that you connect with your tool, that you ask it. Make sure that your energy and the energy of that tool is aligned. Because if it's not aligned, that tool will never become an extension of you. It needs to be, you and the tool need to be aligned in purpose so that you can work well together. So whenever I buy a new tool, a new crystal, a new Journey There wand, you guys know I'm a fanatic, right? I buy all of those. First thing I do is I sit with that tool and I go, okay, what are you here to teach me? What are we going to work on right now? So those are the things that I generally like to do when I'm working with these tools. So make sure that you think about it and choose it because it works for you and it resonates for you. Not because it says it in a spell book, not because Joe Bob told you it would be good, not because it was just pretty. It needs to be something that truly you can connect with and can become an extension of you. All right. How do you choose your tools? What are some of the important factors, right? So where do the tools come from? So if you're using heirlooms, family heirlooms, make sure you understand the complete story of that tool before you start incorporating it. If you don't know the complete story, sit down with that tool and work with it first and say, hey, show me what kind of energy you're bringing. Show me what it is that you have. So let's say you have, an athemi that maybe that's a letter opener that came from your grandfather and from before your grandfather, the grandfather before, and the grandfather before, and it's been in your family for generations, and it's beautiful and ornate, and all of a sudden you see it and you're like, oh my God, this has to be my athemi, right? And all you know about that tool is that you remember your grandfather, maybe on Sunday mornings when you guys went to visit, taking that tool, opening his mail, and just a great warm family time around that tool. And that is the memory that you have, which is great. And that energy is contained within that tool. But what else, right? So when you're gonna take that energy, you're gonna connect with that tool, you're gonna go and say, what energy is here? And you may find out that maybe, 15 generations ago when that tool was created, if it is an old tool like that, it was used to stab somebody. So over the years, you've used it for other things, but that energy originally is still there. Does that mean that that tool cannot be used for your practice? Absolutely not. But it does mean that you're going to have to cleanse the crap out of it. Once you cleanse it and you consecrate it, you go back into that tool and you make sure that that energy is exactly where you need it to be. So just because you have something that's a family heirloom doesn't necessarily, and it gives you a good feeling, doesn't necessarily mean immediately that's something that should be sitting on your altar, that is going to be a tool for you to use in your practice. Always go in and talk to that tool and find out what that tool has for you so that when you add it to your practice, you know exactly what it is. And keep in mind, witchcraft is alchemy, right? Everything that we do, it's like you're baking a cake. So you're sitting in front of your altar and you've got your ingredients, you've got your batter bowl, you've got your blender, you've got all of that. And as you put you in the middle of all of that, and you bring all of those things together, you put it in the oven, boom, voila, comes a delicious cake out of it, right? So you want to make sure that your ingredients and your tools are in good working order. You don't want to take a tool that's maybe kind of got, all kinds of dirt and gross stuff on it and use it in your cake without washing it. What's that going to happen? It's going to contaminate the whole cake. So you want to make sure that your tools are always in alignment with you. And you can't get to that point until you connect with each one of your tools and say, yes, we're on the same page. This is where it needs to be. If a tool has a tie to a specific place, it's the same thing. I have a lot of people that have tools that they bring, there's Shiva Lingams is our perfect example. So a Shiva Lingam is a tool, it's a little egg-shaped tool that comes from a very specific sacred site in India. So when you get a Shiva Lingam and you start working with it, connect with it first. Because yes, it came from that sacred site, but ultimately it's a rock. Ultimately, there have been hundreds and millions of people that have traipsed through that. What's the history of that tool? What happened to that before you picked it up and decided to use it as a Shiva Lingam? So does the tool have all of the energy from that sacred place? Absolutely. But it also has the energy of all the experiences it had before that point. And you want to know, what are you bringing into your cake? Right? What are you adding to your cake? Is this the right ingredient? Is it going to cause the right thing? You can't just pick something up and say, oh, this is not labeled. looks like baking soda. Let me make sure, let me just throw it in there. And if it turns out that it's salt or that it's something else, then you're going to have ruined your cake. So you want to make sure that you know exactly which one of these ingredients you're working with at all times. And then finally, does a tool have an emotional tie for you? Same process. Great if it does. This is something that is mine, was passed down. I have, very emotional tie. What's the history of that tool? Go back in and connect with that tool. And when I say what's the history of that tool, I don't mean book research, which is where a lot of you go to. Oh, I'm going to see where this came from. No, I mean connect with that tool. What is the energetic history of that tool? What happened with that specific tool? So you don't, just the history of it is never going to give you the complete picture. You need to connect with it to really kind of be a part of that and really dig into that tool's energy before you know whether or not that tool belongs on your altar or not. Choose tools that evoke something in you. They will always work better if you have a connection with a specific item. Once again, you look at something, it moves you, right? So let's say, this is a perfect example. I found this rock, and I call it my creativity rock. So this is what the rock looks like. It's got lots and lots of sparkles in it, right? I always keep it on my desk here when I am working on, classes and things like that. Why? Because I look at this tool and there's all kinds of little flash things. There's pieces of copper all over it. I know that it is a metamorphic rock because you've got the bands in there. So there's a lot going on with this tool. So I found this out there. And the minute I found it, the minute that I saw it, I actually found this at Sacred Grove when I went there with Brandy. The minute that I saw it, I looked at the tool, said, I love this. I picked it up and I said, are you willing to work with me? Are you a part of me? And the tool says, absolutely. It was an immediate connection. I left a piece of DNA back there to give back to Mother Earth from when I took the tool. And all of a sudden, I bring this tool home and I've connected with it. I've been able to sit there and sit with it. Anytime I can't figure something out or I'm sitting there trying to rack my brain about what I'm going to do next, I pick this tool up and start kind of palming it and feeling it and going, well, how am I going to fix this? How am I going to fix this? And the answer always comes to me because it's connected to this piece. And how do I know that? Because I asked it. I talked to it. When I first saw it, it evoked something in me, but that's not enough. You have to go in, you have to connect with it and say, what can you teach me? Are you willing to work with me? And the tool's going to say yes. And then voila, you can start working with it. Don't add tools because they're expected. Add them because they have meaning for you. So a lot of people say, well, I have this athame on my altar and I really don't like it, but I have to have an athame. No, you don't. You do not need to have an athame on your altar. You could have a stick if you wanted to. You could use your finger. You could use so many different things. It doesn't have to be an athame. So the tool is there for a purpose. Something else could serve that purpose. You don't necessarily need that specific tool to do that purpose for you. You have to kind of feel your way through it and feel what is right for you and what is not right for you. I hope that makes sense. So the first tool we're going to talk about is going to be your astral candle. This is a very important tool. This is something that I have in all of my altars. Every time I do ceremony in the community that I'm leading any kind of ceremony, that tool is burning on my altar. So what is important about the astral candle? So the astral candle is going to represent you. It acts as an anchor to keep you connected to this realm of reality while you're working in others. Anytime I'm at my altar, the astral candle is the first candle I light, and it is the last item that I snuff out. Once I finish my work, I've closed my circle, I put all of my things away, and I'm getting ready to walk away from my altar, astral candle gets snuffed out. Now, there's a lot of work. A lot of times witches would pour their own astral candles, but you really don't need to do that. I mean, you can do that if you want to, but you don't have to. As long as you get a candle and you basically consecrate it as your astral candle, dedicate to it and say, this is what this candle is going to be, put it on your altar. That's all you need in order to consecrate that and make sure that that candle is your astral candle. You should always work with an astral candle as a matter of safety, and it's a beacon because what? If you're going to journey somewhere, astral candle is going to help you to get back. Sorry, I'm moving this stuff up top so I can see. If you're going to journey somewhere, an astral candle is going to help you to bring it back. If you are going to, if you create something big and you have a lot of energy and sometimes you can be overwhelmed, focus on your astral candle. And this is going to allow you to bring you back to that inner peace place and be able to say, okay, I am in charge of these energies. These energies are not in charge of me, and this is how that's going to work. So there's a lot of different ways that an astral candle can be used. For me, it's probably one of the most important tools to have on your altar. And I have it every single time I journey for somebody, when I do readings for somebody, every single time there's always a candle burning on my altar, and it is my astral candle. Pillar candles or 7-day candles work best. You can use any candle, but then you have to keep repeating. You have to keep putting it back. I like to use big, like you can use a big jar candle, or you can use a 7-day candle or a big pillar, because those last you a really, really long time. And so the more you use it, the more imbued it gets with your energy and the more powerful it becomes. So I want to get a lot of use out of it before I have to replace it with a new candle. This is the first and most important component in your altar. In the shamanic witchcraft tradition that I am teaching, it is the most important component in your altar. You need to have that astral candle there all the time. It's a representation and a connection with you back to the mundane world. The minute you set foot in your altar, you are in sacred space. You are in a world in between. Right? So you're sitting in this place that doesn't exist basically in the real world, and it sits between the real world and the astral world. The astral candle is a way to bring a piece of that real world into that space, so that if you ever need an anchor, you need to come back to that real world for whatever reason, it's immediately right there. You can grab it and you can do it. You don't have to stop your ceremony to go, oh, wait a minute, I need to backtrack now because I feel like things are getting weird. You have the astral candle there, it immediately does that for you. Let's see, next. So let's talk about tools. Tools are just tools, right? The real power is within you. We've talked about that. So the first one we're going to talk about is the athemi. So the athemi, a lot of times, is required for most traditions, but you don't have to use an athemi. You can use a wand, you can use your finger, you can use a stick, you can use any of those things. Traditionally, the athemi would be a double-bladed knife. So if you have one that only has a blade on one side, it's not very traditional, but it still can be used. So whatever calls out to you to be your athemi, that is what you want to have. It's basically what you're going to do with the athemi is an energy mover. So you're going to use your athemi when you're casting your circle, when you're creating boundaries and things. If you're cutting a door in your circle that you need to open up to go in and out of the sacred space you created, when you are directing energy, you're channeling energy from something and you're directing it into an object, the athemi is going to basically be doing that for you. All of those things are going to be parts of what the athemi does. It is an energy mover. That's what you do with it. Generally, in the past, it's had a black handle. There's some symbolism attached to black handle and white handled athemis. I don't particularly go with that symbolism. If you want to research that, you're more than welcome to. For me, I use the tool exactly as it's meant to, as an energy conduit. So however other meanings you put on it is completely up to you. The athemi is always associated with the element of fire. And what does that mean when it's associated with an element? It means that you can use that item to tap into that element. So let's say you're in a place where you can't light candles, but you have an athemi on your altar. Boom, you've got the element of fire in your hands right there because it's associated with that. So when you consecrate your athemi, you're going to consecrate it to yourself. You're going to consecrate it through fire because that is the element that it represents. All of those things are going to be connected with it. And then voila, you're going to have your athemi already ready to go. The second item that you can do is a wand, right? I have both an athemi and a wand in my altar, and I choose which one I want to use at that time. You can have, they're interchangeable, you can use both, but they basically serve as very much the similar way. A wand is something that is going to direct energy in some way, shape, or form into a place, into an object, into somewhere. You can use it for the exact same things you use an athemi for. The difference is that the athemi is going to be connected with the element of air. Now, I will say in some traditions that's flipped. They connect the wand with fire and the athemi with air. I don't use it that way because for me, the athemi is going to cut. It's going to provide action. It's going to provide change, right? When you cut something, you're changing it. Whereas the wand is not going to cut anything. So that element that represents change for me and transformation is fire. So that's why the athemi represents fire. And the wand for me represents ideas, right? It represents the element of air. So what's going to happen when you consecrate your wand, you're consecrating it with air. When you consecrate your athemi, you're consecrating it with fire. There are other items you can add to your altar, natural items. feathers, crystals, herbs, leaves, all of those things that come and they bring a piece of the outside into your sacred space. Once again, when you bring in these pieces, you're going to ask them if they want to participate. You're going to ask what function they're going to serve. You're going to ask if it's okay to use them. All of those questions have to be asked first before you even think about consecrating that item to use on your altar. So feathers, crystals, herbs, leaves, they connect to the power of the element that you are working with. Natural items can be associated with any element. So you can use a feather to associate with air. You can use a crystal to associate with earth. You can use dust or sand to associate with that as well. You can use water, all different types of water to associate with water. And you can use all kinds of different like metamorphic crystals and things like that to associate with fire as well if you wanted to do that. So more items that are going to be sitting on your altar. The first one is the pentacle. So all altars should have a pentacle in the center of it. It should, for me, what I have is I have an altar plate that has a pentacle on it. And I also have a second altar plate that has the wheel of the year on it that I use whenever I am doing a Sabbath ceremony. And what happens at that point is that second altar plate sits on top of my pentacle. Why do you need a pentacle there? The pentacle on your altar is going to ground excess energy and it's going to protect you during your work. The pentacle also represents the element of earth and it's going to be your gateway to manifestation. So when you do your candle spell, you're going to put that candle in the very center of your pentacle. Why? Because you're pushing it through that earth energy, because you want that earth energy to manifest into something tangible, and that is what the pentacle is going to do for you. The pentacle connects the spiritual world to the physical world. As above, so below, the pentacle sits right in the center of that, connecting those two pieces together. It represents all of creation. It's associated with all of the elements. So if you look at the shape of a pentacle, you're going to have the 5 points of the pentacle representing the 5 elements: air, earth, fire, spirit, water. And then you're going to have a circle around it that is going to be protecting all of those. Those are the 5 elements of creation. The circle is what protects it. So you have the whole world of creation within a pentacle, which is the reason why a pentacle is often associated with manifestation. It is that gateway. Now, if you say, I don't want to have a pentacle at the top of my altar, I don't want to have this pentacle, it doesn't go with my decor. That's fine. You can take a pentacle, you can draw it, consecrate it, and you can stick it underneath your altar cloth. So you can't see it, it's just a piece of paper, but it's still there to do the work. So this is not something you have to purchase. You can have it in a piece of paper and you can put it underneath, but it needs to be present. It is a central part of your altar. It is not going to be etched on your table. Having a pentacle etched on your altar table is not the same thing. You need to have something where the pentacle is by itself serving its own purpose there all alone of being a pentacle. It is an item of protection. It is an item of manifestation, of connection to the element of earth. So let's move on to chalice. So what is a chalice? So a chalice, think about it. It is a drinking cup and it comes in many different forms. In Norse tradition, sometimes it's used for a horn. A chalice also can be something that evokes, it's connected with the element of water. It's going to hold a liquid of some type. It is going to be female divinity. Think about what you do with a chalice. You're going to nourish yourself. You're going to drink things, right? You're going to drink water or whatever. So all of these things that are going to help you. If you drink alcohol, it's going to be mind altering. If you drink regular water, it's going to sustain your body. So all of these things are going to be sustenance, nurturing, and then also exploration, if you're talking about mind-altering substances. So all of those energies are going to be associated with the chalice. So does it mean that you always have to drink something out of the chalice? No. It means when you consecrate your chalice is always consecrated with the element of water. It represents water. And just like the athemi, you can reach for it and boom, you have elemental water sitting in your hand. So that's why it's important to have a chalice on your altar. Now, it doesn't have to be there all the time. I don't have space for the chalice to be on my altar all the time, so I kind of pull it back and I pull it in as needed. But it's always consecrated for that purpose, and it's always in the vicinity of my altar area, ready for me to use whenever it is that I need it. So let's talk about a sensor, a smudge pot, or a warmer, right? So you can have, and I have all of those. I have a smudge pot, I have a sensor, and I have a warmer, like a potpourri kind of a thing. So what does that do? So it's going to be something that you're going to burn incense, you're going to burn smudge sticks, you're going to boil herbs. So this is going to be very similar association with, let's say, a cauldron. And a cauldron is a little bit different, but it is going to be that same energy of transformation, that same energy of change. What happens when you burn incense? You transform it from a physical form, it releases its energy in the form of scent, and it releases back up in smoke, right? So that's basically what you have. It is a conduit for transformation and change. It's very much associated with the element of fire. So a censer is all about change through fire. You're burning something and it's changing. So I mentioned before, potpourri warmer. What's the difference there? A potpourri warmer is going to be a vehicle of change also. You're going to put water, you're going to put herbs, you're going to boil those herbs, and it's going to release that beautiful scent from the herbs, right? But the change this time is enacted through the element of water. So if you have a censer, you want to consecrate it with fire. If you have a potpourri warmer, you want to consecrate it with the element of water. They both serve the same function of transmutation. They just do it in very different ways. Fire is going to be that jolt, that fast acting, that immediate. Water is going to be kind of that slow change, that kind of like a very gentle change that's going to happen. So those are the two differences that you're going to see. Let's see. If you're using loose incense, use charcoal or charcoal. If you're using loose incense, use charcoal or a warmer. You can take your loose incense and use it in the potpourri as well if you want to. Let's talk about cauldron. So cauldron is also going to be another item that is going to help you in that regard. So a cauldron is a container of magical transformation. Same way as a censer, it must be fireproof. It's associated with the element of water. It's associated, can be associated with the element of fire, because you have to add fire to that in order for that change to happen. Although fire is not making the change happen, it has to be added as a change. And it must be fireproof. Associated with the element of water and fire is also associated as the womb of the goddess, right? Think about, it's a cooking pot. Basically, it's a cauldron of transformation and change. You take food, you take the raw ingredients, and you transform it into something that can be eaten and changed in that way. So this is what the cauldron is going to represent for you when you're using that. A boline is a traditional herb harvesting knife, and it's going to be the knife you see in the presentation at the top, the one that has the half moon shape. That's the traditional boline. You can also use, I put the clippers there, which is what I use now for harvesting. I used to have a boline. It's a pain in the ass to use. So now I use my regular clippers. And the clippers that I use for magical harvesting are saved, and they are only used for magical harvesting and nothing else. So it makes it a lot easier for you to work with them that way. And they remain sacred. They've been elevated to that position, and they're no longer going to be used just for pruning plants. They're used for harvesting sacred herbs. Big difference there. And when you go ahead and you consecrate these items, they're going to be associated with the earth element, or they can also be associated with herbology. I consecrate them all with the earth element, which means for me, I'm going to use a little bit of dirt, or I'm going to use a little bit of salt, or a little bit of sand, whatever it is that I have on hand. So let's move on to musical instruments. So musical instruments can be used to call in spirits from different directions. They can be used to punctuate a ritual. Your voice is also an instrument. So keep in mind that instruments are going to produce sounds and are going to produce vibrations, which is one of the things that's going to help us in altering the vibrations of the things that we're trying to alter, right? So this is a big help for us in taking that unique vibration and you translating that vibration into power so that it can then do something and become something. Therefore, all instruments are always going to be associated with the element of air, because remember, when we're working with vibration changes up here before they manifest, we're always working with the element of air. So that's where that's going to live. So it can be any instrument that calls to you. So it can be a drum, it can be a singing bowl, it can be two sticks you're hitting together, it can be anything like that, a bell, a gong, all of that. Just see what feels right for you. And a lot of times, if you haven't used it for anything yet, just use it to punctuate ritual in the beginning. And then the more you work with that item, the more you ask it, how should I best use you, the item is going to start teaching you how to use it in ceremony. How is that item supposed to be directing energy for you and helping you when you're trying to make that change that happens through spell casting. So divination tools. Divination tools are very important. They can include tarot, runes, pendulums, crystal balls, black mirror, reflective stones, etc. Everybody should have at least one tool that you use for divination. Why is that important? Because these are going to be the tools that are going to help you to train your intuition. Intuition is a big part of the shamanic witch's life. So you want to have every opportunity you can to train your intuition. It helps you to tap into that gut, into that feeling, that knowledge that you know what's going to happen. So this is a very important tool. So pick whatever calls to you, and you go through the same process. You consecrate it, you tell it why it is that you're wanting to work with it, you tap in. Is this ready? Is this the right tool for me? If it is, consecrate it, and then you can start using it to start training your intuition. Same process. And then finally, you have your Book of Shadows. Why is the Book of Shadows important? Because the Book of Shadows is what's going to contain all of your experiences. It basically is going to be a journal that details your magical journey, details your path, details all the things that are important to you in your growth, in your life, in everything. It's where you keep notes. It's where you put your knowledge of the craft. It's where you write down your experiences, all of that. Over time, your book of Shadows is going to become a tomb of power. Why? Because of the rituals that are written there? No. Because of the energy that you have placed in it. Every single experience you've had, once you've documented that experience, you're transferring that experience into your Book of Shadows. Your Book of Shadows becomes a tome of power that you don't even have to open. You can just pull it and hold on to it, and that book is connected to you, and it is an extension of you, of your knowledge, of your information. A lot of times, if I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do, how am I going to create a new spell, I just sit with my Book of Shadows and wait for that knowledge to come. I don't have to read it. Just sitting with it, I'm tapping in to every experience that I've ever had that's been documented in that book, so that now I can just kind of come to a new experience, a new idea, or something new that I'm trying to create. So it becomes really an invaluable tool, which is why I'm not a big fan of the digital Book of Shadows. I think you should have something, and it should be something that's handwritten. I know a lot of people like to print stuff and put it in there, which is great. I don't think it's going to have the same power. It's going to become a collection of knowledge at that point, which is great, but it's not going to have that energy deposited inside of it that happens when you sit down and you're crafting every single word that goes into your Book of Shadows. That's going to be important. Your last tool is going to be nature. It's going to be the greatest tool around us. Nature is already supercharged with energies of the elements, and so any spell and energies it's going to be a connection to the planet. The forms of magic are available to us in nature are infinite, and you should choose one that appeals to you. Some students are going to revel in gemstones, others are going to have with herbs, others just need to be in nature, others are going to be working with different types of waters. I know people who work with dirt from different places. There's all kinds of different ways to use nature to connect in to the magic of our planet and the magic of where we live. And so that is a tool that do not neglect it. It can be a very powerful tool on your side as well. No matter which tools you choose, it's important that you feel a very special connection with your tool. Hey guys, so it's Raven, and so let's talk about magical name. So what is in your magical name and why it is that you need a magical name. So basically your magical name is always tied back to the person that you are, right? So in this plane of existence that we live in, our magical name is going to tie to a number, right? So our birth number is the date that we were born under. Now our parents gave us a name, that's our mundane name, that's our everyday name. But what's really important is our birth number, right? What is the number that we were born under? And there's so many other synchronicities that are going to lay over the top of that. So why do you need a magical name? So a magical name is needed because just as you were given a name when you were born, as you begin your spiritual path, your magical path, you are birthing this incredibly new, complete human being. So that path, that process, this new entity that you are creating is going to need a name. So this is going to be a magical name is generally a name that you're going to use in ceremony. You're going to use when you're connecting with spirits. You're going to use whenever you're doing any kind of magical work. You're going to use your magical name. This is a name that you want to keep close to you in secret. You do not want to be giving out that name to everybody. I know that everybody calls me Lady Raven. That is not my magical name. My magical name is quite different, and generally only the people in my coven know what that name is. So Raven used to be my old magical name. So we're going to talk about that as we move forward too. So what happens? So you say, okay, so now I'm going to take this new path and I'm going to become this new being and I want to create a magical name, right? But you still want, you're this being that's been created, but you're still in a way connected back to, and I apologize, in the background, there's dogs eating. So I apologize if you hear the munching. So you're going to have so you have this being that you're creating with your magical name, and then you have you here, the mundane being. How do these two, are these connected, right? You don't want to have these two be disconnected because they are basically two sides of one person, your spiritual side, your mundane side, and together they complete, right? So how do you connect that? You connect that through your birth number. So a lot of times people are saying, well, what is your birth number? So the birth number is, if you take the date that you were born, so let's say looking at this slide, you were born on September 1st, 1966, then those are the numbers you would take, right? 911966. You take all of those numbers, you add them up, and once you add them all up, it's going to come to 32. So you're like, okay, great, I have 32. What does that mean? So now you're going to take, so the important thing to remember when you're working with numerology, you always want to bring it down. I know there's a lot of other ways to do it and have duplicate numbers and 3 numbers and 4 numbers and what have you, but for witchcraft, we basically just touch the surface of that. So we don't really dive deep into it. We're just going to touch the surface and connect with our birth number. And so that's always going to be a single digit number. Always, always, always. So if you added everything up and you come to 32, the next step then is going to be to add the 3 and the 2, bring it down to single digit, and now you're going to have 5. So your birth number is a 5, right? So you're like, okay, great, woohoo, I have a 5 birth number. What does that mean? So that means when you craft a magical name that you're going to be using, you want to make sure that that name is going to correspond to that birth number. And you're probably sitting there thinking, well, that's great, but how does letters in a name correspond to a number, right? Aha. So I'm going to share with you guys, and a lot of this is going to be in your lesson, but I'm going to share with you guys some of this, how to do that. So basically, when you start looking into numerology, different types of numerology, this is basically the chart that we're using that's here on the screen. So basically you have, A, B, C, D, and then basically this whole chart is what's going to correspond to all of these numbers. So you take the name that you're choosing, you write that name out, you put the numbers that belong to that name, and you add them up. So in this case, John Smith, they wrote it up. They took each letter that corresponds. Sorry, I apologize. Shh. They took each letter that corresponded to each one of these numbers, and so you have like the J corresponds to 1. Why does the J corresponds to 1? So if you look here on number 1, there's A, and then under it there's a J, and then there's an S. So anytime you have an A, that's going to be a 1. Every time you have a J, that's going to be a 1. Every time you have an S, that's going to be a 1. So if you look at John Smith, you can see that 1 is represented by the J, John, and it's also represented by the S for Smith. And the same thing goes down to all the other numbers. So you're going to choose a magical name, whatever that name is. You're going to add it all up. You're going to come, so they got 44. Once again, to find your birth number, you want to reduce that to single digit. So that would be a number of 8. So John Smith is a name that's equivalent to the numerology name, the numerology birth number of 8. So if you come up with a magical name and you do this numerology part and you add it up and it matches your birth number, you are golden, right? So you are completely good to go. Now you can do this exercise manually. There's going to be things in the classroom lessons that are going to take you through doing it manually. You can, but I will tell you this: it is rare, extremely rare, that you are able to find that your first choice is going to be your birth number. So if you come up and you say, I want this beautiful name of, let's say, my name is going to be Draco, right? Maybe you're a Harry Potter fan and that's what you want. and you've come up with this name, Draco, it's so good, this is what I'm going to use. And you put it in the calculator and it doesn't match. It's not going to match. So this is where different spellings of your name come into play. So I've had a student one time ask me, well, isn't that just a way of you like kind of finagling it to make sure you get it to where you are? No, because what's going to happen is when you write your magical name, you are writing it as it is spelled in the magical way. So even though it may have the same sound, phonetic sound, when you get down to actually spelling it out, it's going to be spelled in the alternate spelling that you have. So it's very important to make sure that that works. So you're gonna, let's say you want Draco, but Draco is not really working. So maybe you say, okay, well, I'm gonna replace the C with a K. So instead of being D-R-A-C-O, it's gonna be D-R-A-K-O. Maybe that'll work. And you may try that and voila, you've got magic. Maybe it doesn't. So then you're gonna start, changing letters and changing things about it to try to get it to where it needs to go. So this is where having a calculator like this that calculates it for you is really, really easy. And I think that this calculator, or there's a different one that's located in the classroom. But here's the part that's going to get confusing. For me, it was easier when I first started because numerology hadn't really taken off and been such a big deal. Now, when you look at these things, they're going to give you like this boatload of numbers and you're like, what the hell is all of that? So you really are looking at your life path number, your destiny number, your name number, and your birth number. Those are generally the four. If I go to certain websites and they have different terminologies that I don't quite understand, I'll go to a website that has a terminology that I do understand. Or a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just test it out to make sure that it's corresponding to the correct thing, because there's different ways to calculate that. So this little chart that we're using here is a chart that we're using in our path, in our tradition. But there are other charts also that will stretch the letters out or bring them closer together. There are charts that are going to remove the vowels and they're going to have different associations than these. So there's a lot of different ways to calculate different things in numerology. So you want to make sure you stay with the simple method, which is this. This is the oldest method and it is the simple method for you to do it. So let's say I'm looking for a birth number 5, right, that we did. So I'm going to put in here Draco, sticking with our example. We're going to calculate our name, and Draco, wouldn't you know it, Draco comes up to a 5. All right, so let's say my name that I want is going to be Penny. That's the name. Maybe it was a family name, grandmother's name. I want to have that. So Penny, right? Penny is going to come, name number is going to be 11, which comes to a 2. So it's not a 5. So you can start making changes. So you can say, well, what if I put Penny like that? So let's see, that comes to a 4. It's a little bit closer. So let's say I say we want to maybe change this. Penny still sounds like penny, but it's penny. Let's see what that does. That comes to a 7. That doesn't work. So let's see, what if we do penny that way? Calculate that, that comes to a 3, but you see how it's going. So we're going to change the different names. So let's say we decide now we're going to say, okay, so now I want Penny, like that. What is that going to be? That's a 9. So let's say I do Penny with a Y. That's a 7. So you're going to put the name in and you're going to try multiple amounts of different ways to spell it to get to the name that you want. And it's going to be very helpful to have a calculator that you can just go through and do that. Because if you're sitting there trying to calculate, one by one from this, you are going to take forever. So the way that we use the calculator is much, much easier for you to be able to calculate that name. Once you come up with that name, then there's going to be a ceremony that you're going to do that's going to be included in this chapter, which you then introduce yourself to the spirit world with that name. You say, hey, this is me. I am this name, and this name is going to correspond to me as this person that I am. And this is what then is going to connect the two of them for you, right? So in witchcraft, one of the things that we do is that every time you have an initiation, you have the opportunity to change your name. Why? That's important because every time you have an initiation, you are moving into a different stage of your spiritual growth, of your spiritual path. And that new person that's being birthed at that stage may be very, very different from the person that existed before that. So as a perfect example, I decided to, my original magical name was Raven, and my birth number is an 8. right? So when I tried it, so Raven, like this, which is what you guys are used to seeing, comes up to a 6. So that's not right. So I tried multiple compilations of that. And what I ended up with was Raven with a Y. And that added up to the 8 that I needed for my birth number. So, and trust me, I tried like RAHVN, I tried all RHAVN. There were a bunch of different ways. And ultimately, this is the spelling that worked. I think I had a couple different spellings that worked, but this is the one I like the best. So for my first 2 years in witchcraft, in my training, this was my magical name, right? So what happens is all of a sudden, like a month before my 3rd degree, I woke up and I just knew that that name didn't apply anymore. I was like, okay, this is no longer my name. So now begins the search. What is a name that is going to really connect with me, that is going to be a name that I can embrace and it can truly be my spiritual self? And so that is how I came up with the name that I use now. And then from there, I chose Raven as a nickname. And I went to Raven as a nickname, being my normal name instead of my regular real name of Renata. The reason for this, because I had a stalking situation in 2009. And so up until 2009, I did not use that Raven name outside anything. It was always Renata. And then when I was in ceremony, it was Raven, right? After that stalking situation, I was already a 3rd degree by then. I said, you know what? I'm going to start using Raven. And then I went back to the right spelling of RAVEN, just so that if somebody were to Google me and look me up, they wouldn't be able to find me and come to my house, because I had somebody I could show up at my house because they were able to find where I lived. So we're not doing that again. So anyway, so basically this is a good way for you to come up with, to test out different names. So you may have an initiation, that name may feel great for you. You do your work, you go through your entire year or 2 or 3 or however long it takes you to get to your next initiation. And then right before your next initiation, one of the things that your high priestess or your coven or your mentor is going to make you do is go back and reflect on that. Is the name still applicable? Does this name match up with who I am and with what I am? And if it doesn't, then you come out of it and you go, okay, I need a new name. So then begins the journey of what is the new name, right? So for me, what I did when I came to that point, when I selected Raven, I was just starting, and it was basically a name that I liked, and I just plucked it, and that was it. When I went to change it and I moved on to the next level, I already had an established relationship with Spirit. I already had been practicing for a long time. So I went into Spirit and said, I need a new name. Do you have any ideas? And Spirit gave me, they didn't give me the name itself, but they gave me a lot of symbolism around what my name needed to reflect, because that was going to be a representation of where I was moving to. And so that is how my new name came about. Not, and it can be a name that you just pluck out. I mean, that's also fine. But for me at that point, because I was getting my 3rd degree, I wanted something that was going to be more meaningful, and it was going to be truly a connection between me and Spirit. So I felt that I wanted their input as to what they saw that relationship looking like. So just because you pick a name now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're stuck with that magical name forever and ever and ever. So at any point, even if you're not at an initiation point, if you just wake up one day and you say that name no longer applies, you can do a name changing ceremony that then you reintroduce yourself to the universe and you say, this name, I'm honoring it. It's a name that served me well. Thank you for everything that I learned under this name. But I am now stepping into a new phase of growth and a new phase of myself as a complete being. And this is the name that I am choosing for that new phase. And then you have your new magical name at that point that you can give to yourself. And you say, now I'm embracing this name. So you can do it many different ways. In shamanic practice, it's a little bit different. Your name is not a name that you choose. Your name is given to you by Spirit. So your name is something that your teacher will journey on your behalf to talk to the spirits, and the spirits will say, we know this person as this name. This is the name that this person is known as. And then that name can also be put out in the public, because it is not a secret name that you chose to do magic with, right? So I actually have 2 names. I have my shaman name and I have my witch name. So my shaman name is a White Thunder Bear. That's the name that I was gifted by the spirits and by my teacher once my first year training was complete, and I completed my shamanic initiation. So that is the name that I was able to receive, White Thunder Bear. So that name can be out there, and as you've seen in all of my bios and all that, that name is plastered everywhere because it is a name that should be out in the community for the community to know me as that name as well. So it works a little differently on the shamanic side than it does on the witchcraft side. But the similarity that you can see is that you still have a spirit name, which is then going to connect with your mundane name, representing that you are a spirit having a human experience. So both of those things go side by side. I hope that makes sense. So when you have this name, you're going to use this name in your initiation. So at the end of this class, you are going to have a self-dedication that you're going to do. And when you do your self-dedication, that is the name you are going to be using when you tell the spirits, hey, I'm dedicating myself to this path, and this is what my magical name is, right? So you're going to go through that at the very end of the class. But it's important to have a name now. This would be the name that the universe is going to know you by. So it's going to say, when you step up into the universe, when I was under Raven, I said, here, I am Raven speaking. Universe is going like, okay, we know Raven, and she connects to Renata in this real life. That is the complete person that I'm talking to. This is the spirit that's incarnated at this time in this lifetime, and it connects, right? Because think about it, time works very differently on the other side. So if you just come over and you say, my name is Renata, and they're going to turn around and say, there's been bazillion of Renatas all around, right? But when you connect that to your birth name, you can say, I am the Renata that was born on this date, basically to these parents who gave me this name. This is me. You're telling the universe exactly who you are and exactly when you are, which is a very, very important component. And so the universe says, oh, so when I look at Raven, I am looking at the Renata that was born on this particular day in the universe. I hope that makes sense. So that's how the two names get connected. And that's how then the universe knows when you speak your magical name, it automatically translates and knows exactly who you are. The results of your work are going to come back to you here, especially when you're doing manifestation work. You're telling the universe when you want this manifested. If I was born, in 1970, which I was, it won't help me if you manifest what I'm wanting in 1869. So the universe has to know, okay, she was born, and this is the part of time, the little stretch of time that she was born in. So this is the stretch of time that we send the information, we send the energy, we send it all to, because we are always coexisting in multiple levels in the universe. So all of our past lives and future lives and alternate existences, we tend to think of it in linear time, right? So things for us happen one after the other, after the other, after the other, right? Our brain cannot comprehend time happening all at the same time. For us, that would be insane because we are not built that way. But that's in essence how time works. Our brains are able to take time and convert it into a linear progression so that we can keep track of it, we can count it, we can relate to it in that way. But in actuality, when you look at the dimension of time itself, it's a whole other dimension all by itself, that where everything that is happening all at once. So if you imagine when you're thinking about, let's say you're looking at the solar system, right? When we come from the sun, if you start at the sun and you start moving, you're going to pass one planet at a time if you're moving in a straight line from here to the end of the solar system. But it doesn't mean that these planets are only coming into place when you're passing them, right? Those planets all exist at the same time. So just because you are approaching it in a specific timeline because of how you are moving through that, it doesn't necessarily mean that things are happening in that order. It just means that you are experiencing it in that order. Those planets are around all the time. They don't go away when you pass it. So that's how time works. Time is like a dimension where everything is happening at the same time. So once that happens, what you're doing is you're telling the universe, as if you were going to say, hey, I'm Raven and I am living here on planet Earth right now, right? So what you're going to say when you talk about the incarnations, the universe is looking at all of your incarnations happening at the same time. And you're going to say to the universe, no, 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 the incarnation that's talking to you right now is the one that was born on this date, that's living this life right now, even though there are multiple ones of them all around you. I know it's a little bit of a mind-bending concept, but if you ever get the chance, there's a movie that actually illustrates this concept beautifully, and it's called The Arrival. It's with Amy Adams, and I think Jeremy Renner is in it as well, if I'm not mistaken. But it's about these aliens that come in and they give us a different way to experience time. And it basically deals with the idea of linear time and nonlinear time and how all of that works. So in nonlinear time, you can experience events in different order than what we're experiencing here, because it would be the same thing as when you're going to, let's say you're going to the end of the solar system, you can pick, am I going to go through Mars first, or am I going to skip Mars completely? I can go out and I can stay, go straight into Jupiter, and then I can backtrack to Mars, and then I can go back up, and then I can go back down. There's a lot of different paths you can take when you are not limited to that linear path that you have to stay in this one thing happening after the other. So that movie, if you get a chance to watch it, it's really fantastic, and it illustrates that concept much, much better. I know when I came out of it, I had a much better understanding of that. So you can change this name later. We talked about that because we outgrow our names. We talked about that. It is not often that these names change, but they can. So this is important to know. The name changes not because you found a cooler name. The name changes because all of a sudden you are not connected to that name anymore. You are not feeling that that name connects to you. Now, I've had people before that have said, oh, I watched a new TV show that has a new name there that I love. Is that a valid reason to change? Possibly. You need to then, what you're going to do at that point is you're going to tap in and you're going to say, is my name really in need of change? Am I really feeling that this new name is going to be very different than who this person was? Am I birthing a new phase of my life because I watched that show and have that name, or not? Sometimes the answer will be yes. The reason why that name appealed to you is because you are birthing a new part of your life, and then that name just happens to show up at the right time, and voila, there you go. But sometimes it's not. So it's always important that you make these decisions not in a vacuum, that you're constantly checking back in with yourself and going, how does this feel to me? Does this sit right with me? Does this feel right for me? And then from there, you can move on to where you need to go. So that is creating your magical name. So I'm going to pause here for a minute because I'm going to snip this video, and I am going to have a little piece of it that is going to be attached to just this numerology portion so that you guys can go in and you can see that, just that piece of the video, without having to go back and watch the whole thing. So let me pause for a minute. Okay. That'll allow me to snip it. So since we're talking about the main class, so let's talk about the final slide that we're talking about. Hello, my mouse is not showing up. Oh, there we go. The final slide that we're talking about. So recommended activities for this month. So let's be honest, tools are fun, but you don't need the tools to practice. We talked about that a little bit. What is the one tool you need to expand your practice? We talked about that. Think about why you're choosing each item. So what I want you to do is go back, sit with your altar, pick up each individual tool. How does that feel? How does that relate? How do you connect to that? And then write it down. Does this belong in my altar? Does this not belong in my altar? So there's going to be a lot of work that you're going to do regarding that. And the other thing that I want you to do is to find your magical name. So that's what I have for you today. So if you have any questions whatsoever, you can message me. You can post questions in the group. Don't forget the study group that we have. You can also post questions and reply to each lesson, and I'll be more than happy to answer that. So, or you can book a one-on-one session with me if you need more clarification. All right, guys, I hope everybody has a fantastic month. Take care. Bye-bye.